In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the front lower control arm on this Ram 1500. Let's get into it. Using a 22mm socket, we're going to take the lug nuts off. Remove the wheel. We're going to take the caliper bolts off with the bracket. Use a 21mm socket. Take these two bolts out. Grab the caliper, just slide it off the rotor, and we're just going to use a hanger and hang it out of the way. And I just pull the rotor off. If it's stuck on, you want to take a hammer and just give it a tap in those locations. Slide that off. Using a trim tool, disconnect this speed sensor. There's a connector on the back here. Just pop that out. See where the connector is. There's a little lock tab here. Just want to slide that up. You can use a pick or even the trim tool. Just try to slide that up. You can try to push it up. There we go. Then you push down on the tab, disconnect it. Just pop the retainers out. Right here on the wire. Slide that out of the way. Using a 36mm socket, I'll take this nut off. You're going to loosen this nut up. You can use a 21mm wrench and a 10mm wrench to hold the stud from spinning if you need to, or a 21mm socket. Loosen that up. We're going to leave a couple threads on there, right there. Now we're going to separate the ball joint from the knuckle. There is different front end tools you can use to try to press this out if you have them. If not, just use a hammer. Just give it a tap. That should just pop up like that. Using a pry bar, just pry this down. You can take the nut off. Slide that up, slide that out of the way. Just give the axle a light tap. Using a 21mm socket, we'll take this nut off to the tie rod. You can use a removal tool or just tap it with a hammer. Pop that off, slide that out of the way. Using a 24mm socket, take this nut off. I'm just going to leave it on a couple threads. That's good. And you can use a removal tool, front end removal tool, or just take a hammer, give it a tap. There it goes, it's separated. Take that off. Slide the shaft out as you slide the ball joint out. And it slides right off. We're going to remove the lower shock bolt and nut. Use a 24mm socket and a 21mm wrench on the bolt. Take that off. Just tap that out. Just punch this out the rest of the way. Slide that out. Now that's loose from the strut. Using a 18mm socket, we're going to take this nut off. And it may start spinning, so you can use some locking pliers up here. Just put some locking pliers right there. That's going to prevent it from spinning. Take that nut off. You can remove the locking pliers. Just going to put this lower link nut on, just so the control arm doesn't swing down. You can also put a support underneath. That's good, just so it doesn't fall. Before we loosen up these cam bolts or lower control arm bolts, I'm just going to mark this with a crayon, just so when you put it back together, it's close to where it was. Then it'll be easier for the alignment. You're still going to need an alignment afterwards, but it'll at least be closer. Do the same on the back one. Using a 24mm socket on the bolt and 24mm socket, take the nut off. And the washer on the other side. And we'll pull the bolt out. You may have to hammer this out with a punch and a hammer. A lot of times they stick in there. Sometimes you even have to cut them out. And we'll do the same on the back one. Take that off. Give it a tap. And slide that out. Move the support. I'll just slide this down. And it comes right out. You may have to use a pry bar and just pry it out of there. Slide the control arm in place. Get that lined up. We're gonna put the link in place as well. All right, that's lined up. Just get a nut for the link. And at least you can let go a little bit. You can use a rubber mallet if you need to. Just get it close. Get the bolt started. Yeah, we'll get the front bolt started. Give it a tap. Put the washer on the back side. And then the nut. Just rotate this back and forth. There is a little pocket where this washer has to be, so you want to make sure it's in the pocket, and the same on the back side. Start tightening that up. Just make sure it's in the pocket. These are just loose. Before we tighten those up, we have to put the shock bolt in. Push the shock back. And if you need to, you can use a support to raise it up. Get the bolt started. Snug that down. Now you want to get the vehicle as close to ride height as possible. It would be ideal if you could put this all together and torque these bolts on the ground, but that isn't very easy to do. So just be careful and get it as close as possible. Just raise up on the control arm. That's good. sure those are lined up. We'll torque these bolts to 155 foot-pounds. In the lower shock bolt, we're going to torque that to 125. I'm going to use some locking pliers on the link. Tighten the nut up. And torque that to 75 foot-pounds. That's good. Now you can lower the support. Slide it out of the way. Now slide this in place. Get the lower ball joint and the axle in at the same time. And take the new lower ball joint nut. Get that started underneath. Once that's started, you can release the knuckle. All right, I'm gonna take the outer tie rod in, slide that in place, get the nut started. Line up the upper control arm, slide the ball joint through, and take the nut, get that started. Now I'm just using a pull jack. Just get the knuckle into position, just put a little bit of pressure on it, tighten that nut. We're going to torque this to 38 foot-pounds. And then if you have a torque angle meter, you want to use that and go an additional 90 degrees. If you don't have one, do the best you can. Now we can lower the pull jack. Using a pry bar, just pry down on the tie rod so that the stud is tight. Then we're going to tighten this up. Get that snug. Torque this to 29 foot-pounds. And then an additional 90 degrees. You can use a torque angle meter if you have one. That's 90. Take a pry bar and just pry the upper control arm down. Snug this nut up. Torque this to 26 foot-pounds. And then you want to go an additional 180 degrees. You can use a torque angle meter. If you don't have one, do the best you can. Put the axle nut on. And tighten that down. Using a pry bar, slide it between the studs, making sure it's touching the ground. We're going to torque this nut to 185 foot-pounds. That's good. I'll put the rotor on. I'm just going to use a lug nut so the rotor does not fall off. Temporarily. Take the caliper off the hanger. Slide the caliper over the rotor. caliper bolts started. Torque these bolts to 130 foot-pounds. Take the ABS wheel speed sensor wire, push that grommet in there, another retainer, push that in, find the connector, connect the connector, lock it down, and then push down on the lock. Line this up, push that in place. Take the lug nut off. Put the wheel on. Put the lug nuts on. Snug those down. Now we're going to torque these in a cross pattern to 130 foot-pounds to tighten the wheel down evenly. And just go around again, double check. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.